Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Leslie Kernisan, board-certified geriatrician and founder of the website betterhealthwhileaging.net. And this is the Helping Older Parents video podcast, where I cover the best ways to support aging parents and other older loved ones so they can live better lives in their later years. I also often address common caregiving concerns and dilemmas, like what to do if you're worried about an older person's memory or safety, how to deal with Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia, and how to help your older loved one get the care they need. Today's episode is part of a series that I'm calling Real Eldercare Stories, in which I invite family caregivers to look back on their experience caring for an aging parent or other older loved one. My guest today is Suzanne from Vermont. She was a part of my Helping Older Parents membership for a few years while she was caring for her mother, who died at age almost 98 in December of 2025. So Suzanne, thank you so much for being here today and for being willing to talk with me.
Sure. Happy to.
Okay. So I thought that what I'd do is start with just like a quick overview of the caregiving situation that you were in. And then I would love to just have you talk a little bit more about it. So when you joined the Helping Older Parents membership, your mother was 94. If I remember right, and she had been living in independent living about 2 hours from you since age 80, actually, right?
Right.
And I think you have shared in the past that she was pretty functional, that her memory was quite good until just a year or two before you joined the membership. And she had initially joined a continuing care retirement community. That's where she was in independent living because she had macular degeneration and thought she would need more support at some point, right?
That's right. She chose that herself.
She chose that herself. And so you were a couple hours drive away, and you do have some siblings, but somehow you had become the person who was your mom's main point of support.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
So maybe we can start with that part of the caregiving journey. So at that point, which I guess was about 4 or 5 years ago, what was it like to be supporting her at this stage of her life, and how did that feel to you both?
Yeah. Well, it actually started quite a bit earlier than that. I mean, I would say about 20 years ago, I was visiting her more and had moved back to be close enough to be able to do that. I had lived in Colorado before that. And so we kept in touch and had a lot of conversations about end of life. And we had even had conversations like that as far back as when I was in high school.
Oh, wow.
About kind of what we thought. I remember sitting with her in her kitchen because I had to do a debate about whether euthanasia should be legalized.
Oh,
And
my
so
gosh.
I remember talking with her about that, just brainstorming and all of that. So really those conversations went way, way back. And when she was fully functional in independent living, when she first moved into the CCRC, she was driving still, probably close to being not, so she should be driving, and she did stop soon after that, but really showed no signs at all of memory or thinking issues. Very active in the community. And so in that time period, I was just forming kind of more of a close adult relationship with her, which was a chapter I was very, very grateful for. And we had many conversations during that time that were not really caregiving conversations, but more like so-and-so down the hall just had this healthcare adventure. What does that tell us about what we might want? So all of those conversations came in very handy later. And that was sort of, I would drive her places sometimes or pick up some food for her or things like that, but I wouldn't have called it caregiving. And she would have felt it was hovering if I had done more at that point. Very independent person.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
so it's wonderful that she was so willing to engage in conversations about this. A lot of older adults don't, for various reasons, with their children. And I'm just wondering, like, at that time, like, what did she envision the end of her life would look like, or her last year look like? Did she have a vision for that?
Well, she had some suspicions, which
Uh-huh.
were that she had had a heart condition from birth that had limited her somewhat, and that led to her having pretty severe atrial fibrillation as an older adult. And so she always thought that that would be her uh, death knell, would be that her pulmonary hypertension would get to the point where she would die from that. We never suspected that dementia would become part of the scene. And
Mm,
so I don't think she ever really envisioned any scenario that included memory or thinking problems.
mm,
But she did say very adamantly that she did not want to be in a nursing home or in any other kind of situation other than her independent living apartment. And she said, no matter how bad things get, I never want anybody in my apartment following me around all day. That was her worst case scenario. So it's
because
hard for
she
me to
thought she
say.
would never be dependent enough to need that kind of support and supervision.
I think it would have been hard for her to imagine being that dependent, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But if she was, that would be the worst way to accomplish it in
Mm-hmm.
her values. Just
Mm-hmm.
to have somebody in her space. She
Mm-hmm.
really, really didn't. She felt that things were very intrusive to have any helpers coming into her own realm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then at what point did like the dynamic feel like it was shifting for you, and that you had to step in more as a caregiver?
Mm. It's strange. I was thinking about this, and in some ways it happened very, very gradually, but then there were certain things that happened suddenly that would get surprising. Like she first started to get a bit repetitive, probably around when it kind of coincided with the COVID lockdown, where there
Mm-hmm.
was about 6 months where they couldn't go out of their apartments. And she and I would talk on Zoom. Luckily, I had set that up on her computer. And maybe even before that, she got a little bit repetitive. So I would say around 2018, 2019, but not excessively so. And she still had a lot of higher thinking skills that were working just fine, and was still interested in contributing to committees and learning and all of that. I think that things escalated to a certain point during that whole weird COVID time, and her thinking and memory got worse during that time. And then there were later stages, even than that, where I would be startled at something that she really needed help with. So it was both gradual, but also with jumps in things getting different,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. And how aware was she of these lapses in memory or shifts in her abilities?
Well, it's a little hard to crawl inside her mind because she compensated really well, I think. And Michelle, the helping older parents social worker in the membership, was very helpful. And she said to me one time that a lot of times people who were really smart could compensate quite well until they had some kind of a crisis. And so at least she was aware enough that, well, she was very aware that her mother and her grandmother had both died at 90. And so she looked at 90 as being kind of a milestone that she would probably reach, and that
Mm-hmm.
she would think it was a big achievement if she had. And so when she went beyond 90, I think she did express even saying, well, what now?
Mm.
Because she was in a chapter that maybe she didn't expect so much to
Mm-hmm.
be in.
Mm-hmm.
And how did she track it? She tracked it enough to um I forget whether she initiated or she agreed that I would become her healthcare proxy, as opposed to my sister who lived a really long distance away.
Mm. Uh-huh.
Um and we redid all of her legal paperwork and thought things through and did this big project. And that was in 2017. So she was still 8 years before she died.
Uh-huh.
And when we did that project together, she was still really able to engage in it just fine and even do some of the work. And she was starting to have a little trouble with some of the websites she had to deal with and all of that. So that was kind of an in for me too. I could say, don't waste your eyeballs on trying to navigate the changes that they're making to your bank website. Like, why
Uh-huh.
don't I do your bills for you and whatever?
Uh-huh.
So those kind of changes happened, and how aware she was of her really needing those changes in caregiving, or whether she was kind of trying them on for size because she knew things were changing, or just setting it up in case she needed it in the future. I can't be quite positive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe a combination of the both.
Mm-hmm. Um, well, I definitely remember when you joined us that you're telling us that it had been sort of surprising and distressing to realize that she was sort of shifting with her memory because she had done so well for so long that that you had sort of thought this wasn't going to be part of her journey. And it was kind of a surprise in that way.
That's right. I think it was a surprise to her and a surprise to me and my sisters.
Uh-huh.
And frankly, to well, maybe not so much to the staff because they had seen it in their facility with so many people who eventually had thinking and memory problems. But yeah, it was a surprise that we were
Yeah.
suddenly dealing with that.
Yeah. And then what were some of the things that were particularly challenging during those few years after that once you noticed that shift?
Well, I think it was challenging to her to be willing to accept the kind of help that she would have never needed even, a month or 6 months or a year before. She was really well aware that she was losing some of her abilities. And at the same time, she was grateful and she was willing to accept things from me that she wasn't willing to accept from other people.
Uh-huh.
And so it was challenging for her to be losing her sense of independence and competency and agency. She was pretty aware of it, I think. What was challenging for me was, first of all, to adjust to that my mom, who had always been so smart and competent and independent, what I needed to do was to find the places where she was still that way, which were many. She
Mm-hmm.
still was very astute in many ways. And so for me, the challenge was to remain open to the places where there were successes and coherence and all of that, and also not be too freaked out when there really was something that seemed very basic that she was having trouble with. And my training as a middle school special ed teacher came in very handy because I was used to meeting people where they were and finding new ways of doing things. And for me, that was kind of fun, actually, was I could flip the creative aspects of finding a way and doing it in a friendly way with humor and kind of normalizing, even though this was my mother. So on another level, it was heartbreaking, but it was also heartwarming that I could do it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was both at the same time.
Yeah. And how did you manage that distance between you, a couple hours drive? Like how often did you go in person and what methods did you use for helping her from like afar?
Yeah, well, even before she had memory and thinking problems and needed a whole ton of help, I was going down about every 10 days, 2 weeks for an overnight, not always staying with her, but visiting her and maybe picking up some stuff at stores for her and things like that. And so it became, and I also got I had some of my own connections down there. So I would come and go and stay with her. And so we kind of got into that rhythm. And I liked it. It was good for me too. And she really liked having me around, which was nice because she didn't always feel that way when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
I was a little bit of a tough kid for her in many ways. Uh, so then it was obvious that it became much more necessary
Uh-huh.
and much more intensive caregiving being done when I was there. But we had sort of made it so that we were being companionable when I was there. So it wasn't like I was swooping in and saying, okay, what's the list? I mean,
Right.
I kind of had that in the back of my mind,
Uh,
but we could do it in a rhythm and that was comfortable for both of us. And I would always try to engage her in making up a way to make something easier so that it was more of a invitation rather than me like bossing her around a lot.
yeah. Yeah. And
So
then could you tell us a little bit about what happened in the last year? I feel like we don't have enough stories about like what tends to
the last
happen
dinner.
in the last year of her life. But yeah, tell us a little bit about, the events there, because I know there was some events that really shifted things for you and her.
Yeah, I would say about a year before she died, maybe a little bit earlier than that. I really was trying to get her to consider assisted living up closer to where I live because she was starting to lose her sense of time. And she wasn't like putting guilt trips on me or anything about how often I was around, but she would get sad when I was leaving and feel like it was a pretty long time. And there was also a period of 3 months where I had something going on where I couldn't see her, and that was really hard on her to go 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
It was hard on me too, but so I was trying to find a place for her that was really good that she could move up here to where I live. And I found a place and she always kind of stayed one step ahead of me in terms of her needs so that I would just think I was lining something up that would be good and she would be not suitable for that environment anymore. So that was really
Mm-hmm.
frustrating, challenging.
Her needs were kind of more than the option that you found.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And I even would say to her, Mom, um, you I know you want to stay in your apartment because she would say, I can't imagine why you think it would be a good thing to move somebody like me at my stage of
Mm-hmm.
life. And I would agree with her and say it is a real challenge, but I could see you a bunch of times a week and for shorter times. And
Mm-hmm.
um, but then by the time I'm trying to think now. Yeah, she was adamant about at first she was open to it and I was thinking inside, "Yay, I have a chance of shifting this." And then in the next conversation she was adamantly against it.
Mm-hmm.
And then so that became I even said to her, "Well, the problem is that if you have a crisis, then our options are going to be fewer."
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times that happens, and
Mm-hmm.
everybody who's 94, everybody who's 90, even reaches 90, is either dead or needs a lot of help. We would talk frankly like that. And
Mm-hmm.
she would chuckle and yeah, and she'd say, "You make a good case."
Mm-hmm.
But then it would be nope.
Right.
So then on Mother's Day last year, 2025, she fell in her
Mm-hmm.
apartment. And that began the slippery slope. And in a way, I think this is very typical. You would know that
Yeah.
a bad fall, and that starts the end of life trajectory. And she
Yeah.
didn't break anything.
She didn't break anything. That's what I was trying to remember. Mm-hmm.
Nope. And she was very, very sore all day. And the nurse in the CCRC was checking in with her. And in the evening said, "She seems to be okay. She's pretty beat up." And I said, "Well, just have her get up and walk around a little bit." And when she got up and walked around, she complained that her hip was really, really sore. And the nurse recommended that she go to the hospital, which is right next door. And so she did, and that began the whole thing of brain scans to make sure there wasn't a bleed and x-rays and this and that. And then when they were going to release her from the ER, and she fainted. Now she
Mm,
probably hadn't eaten all day.
right.
And this is where I guess I would say for other people listening that the more you can be on the scene in person, the better.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I'd been there, I would have wondered about food. And
Right.
so they admitted her, and she spent 3 days in the hospital, really got that hospital acquired delirium that they talk
Mm-hmm.
about, where the
Yeah, got
confusion gets much,
confused.
much more. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
By that, and I went down there, and so they found no brain bleed and no breaks, and but the CCRC, everybody said she had to go back to the nursing care part of
Mm-hmm.
the CCRC.
Mm-hmm.
So she was there for about 5 weeks, hated it,
Mm-hmm.
anxious the entire time, uh, very sort of hospital feeling to her. She was very confused about what had happened. I would say she bounced back a little bit from the hospital acquired delirium, but
Mm-hmm.
she was definitely worse than when she went in than
Yeah,
before she.
she never got back to where she was before. Mm-hmm.
Nope.
Yeah.
And I was really in a dilemma. That was again like she was beyond any place that was available near where I lived, and her wishes were ringing in my ears from all the conversations we'd had. I don't want the only way they would let her back in her apartment was if she had a full-time caregiver in there.
Mm-hmm.
And her words were ringing in my ears. The very worst thing would be to have somebody following me around all day in my apartment.
Mm-hmm.
So then a room opened up in the assisted living / memory care. I had put her on the waiting list like 5 years earlier just for the heck of it. At that
Mm-hmm.
point, I thought, oh, she'll never need that. But the director of it said, well, you can put her on the list and it puts her in a preferential place if she needs it. So
Mm-hmm.
I think I said, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And a room came up, and I just decided that that was going to be the best thing because she would have her own things around her. She would have her own room, not a roommate. And at that point, there was no other good option.
Yeah. And she probably still needed somebody to be coming in and helping her too, because assisted living, you know, doesn't necessarily include somebody coming in to provide that support.
She didn't have any extra people coming in
Okay.
for until she had a couple of small strokes 2 weeks before she died, and then
Mhm.
the assisted living was really set up to give her the amount of help she needed,
Oh, that's good.
and she really didn't want a ton of help. She was kind of like a leave me alone kind of person,
So,
and
how much were they helping her before she had her little strokes?
they were coming and reminding her of when meals were and
Mm-hmm.
helping her get from one place to the other. She was getting physical therapy, which was keeping her strong enough to get around with a walker, which she often forgot to use. But
Mm-hmm.
this was a challenging part, was the being in an institution and honoring both their needs for safety and her needs for independence.
Mm-hmm.
And I always advocated for her independence. I
Yeah.
said to them, that's what she wants most of all. So don't pester her too much.
Mm-hmm.
And if she has an accident, she has an accident. I mean, I wasn't careless about it, but
Mm-hmm.
I knew her values.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you knew that it was important to her to have that autonomy and to a certain extent to risk the accident, right?
Yeah, and also
Mm-hmm.
she was at that point, she was pretty frail and pretty reclusive.
Mm-hmm.
And she wanted it that way. She
Mm-hmm.
wasn't interested in making new friends, or I
Yeah.
think she was pretty depressed being there. I mean, she was not in physical pain, but she was in existential pain. She
Mm-hmm.
really had a sense of the loss of herself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like I have a memory a little bit of you telling us that she would sometimes allude to kind of wondering how much longer it was going to go on. Right?
Yeah. Yes. But it was hard for her to keep a real long train of thought about that going.
Okay.
And she still looked forward to meals and stuff. I think just it was something to do. With her vision problems, she couldn't really take part in very many activities that they offered.
Yeah.
So it was hard. It was hard, and I'm glad it didn't go on longer than it did.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have been. She never got to the point where she didn't know me, or she certainly didn't know new people.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit about her death?
Sure. Well, she had these 2 little strokes. They noticed that, and we had taken her off blood thinners after the fall. Just the risks didn't seem worth. The benefits didn't seem worth the risks for stroke prevention. So she had these 2 little strokes. They called me and said she really looks much weaker, and she's kind of dribbling her orange juice. And so I went down there, and I was there for 2 weeks. That's when I enrolled her in hospice. And even though I'm a early hospice advocate, hospice volunteer for 25 years, I had waited, even though she would have qualified because of her heart condition, because her autonomy and going to the bathroom on her own and getting on her own 2 feet to go to the dining hall, it was so important to her that I thought her being able to keep having the physical therapy was worth it. And that was a little tough because she could have died sooner if she hadn't had the physical therapy and had just crumped out sooner. But she was still having those urges to get around and do stuff, and we had a good connection, and so she was pretty much in bed after those 2 little strokes and still wanted to get up to go to the bathroom. Did it with help at first, and then and would walk to the bathroom in her room. And then eventually we got a commode, and it was just sort of a gradual kind of wasting away. She didn't eat anything after the strokes, but and she was very skinny, but it still took her 2 weeks to die. And she was having little sips of water from a spoon. And it was so sad because she was so much of a water drinker, and she was kind of slurring her words, but she would say, "I just want a real tall glass of cold water."
Oh.
And that was hard for her in the first week or so. And then so we would give her little spoonfuls just to help with that. And she had moments of lucidity, sometimes even a little bit of humor, and she didn't like people hovering over her, but at that point I did have to hire private caregivers because they said even if she was on hospice, if she tried to get out of bed and fell, they would have had to take her to the hospital. And that was an absolute no over my dead body. So at that point, she had people sitting with her there's sort of an associated private caregiver organization with the CCRC. So I was dealing with them and the CCRC and hospice. And that was a very challenging part of it, was to have these institutions all with their rules and their
Yeah.
And she wasn't in pain. And one of the challenging things was that what I really needed to watch was her breathing when it came to medications. And so the hospice nurses, it was a different one. Every time a nurse came, it was a different one. And they all just asked about pain. And didn't really know her.
Right.
So that put me in I was sort of the coordinator and
Yeah.
the main caregiver at that point, deciding when to give her some medication and when to hold off and all of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
In her last day, her breathing got rough.
Uh-huh.
Not that really end of life gurgly breathing. It wasn't
Uh-huh.
like that. It was more like very, very labored,
Uh-huh.
which I guess is part of I don't know whether she'd had an embolism or, we
Right.
talked about that in the
Uh-huh.
Zoom call about what it might have been. But so I gave her more morphine then,
Uh-huh.
and she died quietly.
Mhm. Were you able to be
It
there?
was,
Were you there at the time?
I wasn't there when she died. No,
Yeah.
as so often happens, I'd left
Sometimes
to be
they
able to
wait.
go next.
They wait for their families to be gone, and then they do it. We hear that a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
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 Hmm. Yeah.
And
Not
so
surprising.
the caregiver that was sitting with her was a new one, and she was a little hysterical when she called me. She
Oh.
said, "I think your mother has stopped breathing."
Oh.
And I said, "Do you mean she died?"
Uh-huh.
And she said, "Well, I think so." And then
Oh.
she got kind of hysterical, and
Well, she
I just
may.
asked her to tell me what it was like. I said, "Give
Yeah.
me all the details, and then you can go."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Well, it sounds like you did such an amazing job of accompanying her through these last years. What is what is something what are some of the things that surprised you the most about this journey with her?
well, I guess, as I said before, that we landed in that territory at all. As prepared as you are and as much as you know about end of life, there's something that's a little shocking about it, even though you're not surprised.
Uh-huh.
So there was sort of that. Um, what else was I surprised about? Sometimes I was surprised at the way we were able to connect when we were both so changed.
Mm.
That and I was gratified about that. Um, I was surprised at how some very, very simple things became too much for her.
Mm.
And on the other hand, how she could be so lucid in some other ways about kind of philosophical things or emotions, or, she would say something that was very, very perceptive, and yet she would insist that her dishwasher was broken because she didn't know how to use it
Right.
anymore. So
Right.
I was surprised at some of the contrasts, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what are things that you found especially helpful for you in supporting your role in this journey?
Well, it was very helpful to connect with people who really knew about the systems that might be available,
Hmm.
and that included the Helping Older Parents membership with you and Michelle, the social worker, really getting sometimes very specific about things. And the companionship and all of that was really good too. And from other members, I sometimes got really good suggestions, like the Robin clock that has the date and the time and everything. And
Hmm.
I got one from Mom and just put it near her medications in her kitchen. And she just went, "What's this? This red frame?" She could easily dismiss and scorn something like that, but I just decided to do it, and it was a huge hit. And
Hmm.
and so that was a surprise, but it was also the kind of support that I got from the group, because I didn't really know about
Yeah,
some of that equipment and stuff.
ideas for things
Yeah.
that have solved little problems for other families.
Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. And sometimes just other members knew about those kind of things. Um, it was hard a part that I didn't get was just getting emotional support, because that just requires that somebody really know me, the caregiver, really well, and
Hmm.
maybe be more intimately involved day to day. And so that was something that I think somebody could benefit from, but which I was kind of missing.
Hmm.
Um, what was helpful? That's a hard question. I mean, I guess what was one thing that was helpful to me was my state of mind and heart and training about working with people who have learning problems, because that allowed me to be more flexible with her and to be looking for things that could meet her where she was. She always described learning as that you have to have hooks in your mind to hang things on. That was the metaphor she used. Like, the new thing needs to relate to something that's already in your head. And so what I had to do with her was think about, find a substitute hook if the old one wasn't there anymore, to fish around for a new hook that I could attach some new learning to. And so that attitude was helpful. And it was also helpful in me asking for help from other people. If I could say, here's what she used to do, or here's the way she thinks, what might be a way to approach? I don't know if that really answers your question.
Yeah.
I felt really like I was kind of on my own. I can't imagine that I was really thinking all the time about the people who were alone with an aging parent in their home for years on end. And that must be very, very hard.
Yeah. I think that can be pretty intense, and that for all that a lot of older adults prefer to not be in a communal living situation at the end, I think for the people directly providing care, the fact that they're not alone and that they're with other people as they do this, I think can be important.
Yeah. I would have liked to have had her in my home for those last 2 weeks. I feel like I would have been able to provide more of what would have worked for her. But it just didn't make sense to like bring her up in an ambulance and do all that. So we did the best we could.
Yeah. And I recall, I think at what point you thought about moving her sooner, but that the hesitation was that you thought you could do it for a few weeks, but what if it ended up being several months?
Yeah.
And it's true, we have to make these decisions without knowing exactly what lies ahead and how it might play out. A lot of uncertainty in the journey. Yeah.
In a sense, when the shoe really drops, then you work with what you've got.
Yeah.
And in some ways that's easier than all the what if, and waiting for this to drop. So
yeah, you can't plan for everything, is I think one thing I've realized.
But I think one thing I would really recommend to other caregivers with parents is to, within the realms of their personalities and how they deal with each other, to really set a lot of things in place just in case. You know, I feel like it can be very casual. I think you advise people about this really well, is to try to approach just lining logistical things up, because if you have a crisis and things are not in place, it's really, really hard.
Yeah, hope for the best, plan for the quite possible. Because what does happen for many people is that there will be a crisis, or there will be a period of needing care and support more intensively from others. You know, and if that comes to pass, what might it look like? So, yeah. Well, Suzanne, thank you so much for being here today to share about your journey accompanying your mom. She was so lucky to have you with her to support her through this. And it just sounds like you did a really beautiful job shepherding her through this last part. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
Well, we did the best we could. And there were a lot of very satisfying things about it. And I appreciate you guys' help as well.
Oh, thank you.
From the Helping Older Parents. It was a really good piece. Yeah.
Okay, I'm so glad. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you so much for being here and for everything you are doing for your older relative. If you would like to learn more from me or even get my guidance with your caregiving situation, take a look at the description for this video. There will be a link to a page where you can learn more. I also hope you'll subscribe to the channel. That's another great way to stay connected. So thank you once again, and I look forward to seeing you all again on a future episode of the Helping Older Parents video podcast.